My world that I want to have a little pride in. My world, and it's not a place I have to hide in. Life's not worth a damn till you can say I am what I am.
Our very welcome guest this week is Dr. Mel Duffy from Dublin City University, and Mel is attached to the Department of Nursing, Psychotherapy and Community Health. Have I got that one right, Mel?
You have. We have great time of deciding to reinvent ourselves every now and again.
What would academe be if we didn't, as we say, rebadge? Yeah. Mel, you and we go back quite a way, almost a decade, and to what I would call the certainly very much the genesis of the campaign for gender recognition. Has it come a long way, or has it now reached a point where certainly the negative forces, which we thought had, shall we say, come to a level of acceptance, they're all re-emerging now with what I'm seeing is a newfound venom and nastiness?
Well, you see, I just think that's a gift from Trump, because people saw how somebody in power was allowed to say what he said uncontested, and it was given credence. And so that gives people, I suppose, a little bit of bump so that they can go and repeat it. And I do think that to me, when we see this, for me, it's a bit of laziness on the part of people who come up with these ways of thinking, because they're not really ways of thinking, they're just carrots. And in one sense, I have no problem when people have really researched an area, have come up, and we can have a discussion. And I don't care whether it's robust, I don't care what format it takes, but we actually listen to each other, because sometimes it derives out of fear of what's different, fear of the other, fear of change. And in a way, when people turn around and say, this never happened before, this is a newfangled idea, then the problem is we don't know our history. We don't understand that people always existed in different formats, in different ways. I always think of that great film, Yentl.
Oh, well, isn't it fabulous?
Isn't it just? And I remember seeing that for the first time back in the 1980s. And sitting there going, oh my God, this is amazing. And Yentl showed us in a sense how aspiring to become what one wants to become, sometimes we have to transform to become our true human being.
I always remember back, I think it was about 2012, late 2012, you did an interview with News Talk, and I think it was Sean Moncrief at the time. No arguments about Sean, but I remember almost one of the first questions he asked you, he said, was essentially along the lines of, what is this transgenderism? And it was almost like he understood it as an ideological thing.
Yes.
How did you feel when he asked you that? And do you think, based on what's happened since then, that we've put that behind us, or is it still there, bubbling away under the surface?
I think it lurks in the shadows. But what did I feel then? I remember looking at him and thinking, are you comfortable in who you are? When you wake up in the morning, do you think of yourself as a man? Do you think of yourself as a human being? How do you feel about the body you sit within? How do you feel about being you? And I think one of the enormous things is that the majority of us within society never question that. We never actually have to question that, because we're quite okay. Okay, we get the fat shamers, the obesity crew every now and again. So what they are at is shaping us and wanting us to look the way they want us. But that's got to do with how we perform in our bodies within society and how we look and dress and behave. I mean, if you think of moving from the skirt to the trousers, that kind of thing.
Sure.
But when you're talking about something that's deeply spiritual, deeply psychological, deeply existentialist, who am I? Then once we start that question, that is to go deep into the self and to come out with answers to my visceral self, my essence of being human. And the majority of us don't have to do that. If you're a gay man, you must do it in relation to the heterosexual man, because I'm different from him. How am I different from him? Why? But I look the same as him. Well, I act different, I feel different, I love different. That's an existentialist crisis. As a woman and as being a lesbian, I had to do the same of unpacking who I was as a woman. Because if it was, when I was growing up, to be a woman was to be a heterosexual woman. I had my mother, who a wonderful mother, but I wasn't like her. I didn't love like her. I didn't want to, and with no disrespect, I didn't want to be like her because I wasn't straight.
Yeah.
And that's not because if I was straight, I'd love to be like her. And as I get older, I realize actually I am quite like her. So
Yeah.
that's a conundrum.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
those are the two ones that are, in one sense, easier to negotiate than if I have, and I'm looking at other, I'm a girl and I'm looking at other girls and going, I'm not like you. I don't feel like you. My existentialist crisis is my gender. It is, who am I? It's much deeper. And unfortunately, the mental health world has looked at you and has said to you that there is something innately mentally ill about you, while in fact the World Health Organization has now recognized to question my being is not a mental health condition. But unfortunately, so many people have been treated with as being depressed. But you're not, when you question yourself, that's not depression.
Sure. Yeah. An interesting one there, because you and I, Mel, we grew up in, let's be honest, what I will euphemistically call a Catholic tradition. Now, particularly at the time I grew up, all sex was dirty. All sex was, and same sex was, well, it was basically it was a perversion. It was a mental illness. It was a whole range of things. So you can understand why people of my generation very much stayed in the background, because as I said to people, we never had gay in Ireland. We just had queer, and queer was mad. What was your experience growing up, Mel? Did you, I mean, clearly you would have been conflicted. How did you deal with that?
Well, growing up, well, you see, the thing is, I love that saying, the only gay in the village, because I felt like I was the only gay in the village. I grew up where I didn't see difference, and yet difference, when I look back, was all around me. I went to a boarding school, and in a boarding school, it was very much heterosexual, regimented, etc. There was no questioning about who you were, or no, we did history, we did various different, we did art, literature and all, and you never got representations of being lesbian. And I remember being at home one summer, like during the, during the tennis season, and it was wonderful. Martina Navratilova arrived on screen. And I remember my father turning around and saying to my mother, but she's a lesbian, and suddenly it was, oh, I have a name here.
Yeah.
And you say that, and you're looking and you're thinking to yourself, as you do, you think to yourself, oh my God, they're going to see it in me. Oh my God, they're going to ask questions. So it was fear. It was fear of standing out. It was fear of being different. And yet I questioned everything. I always questioned everything. I think I had, but, why, where, all of those have been my friends throughout my life. Even though school tried to normalize you into not asking them, because you're allowed to ask them as a child, because that's part of growing up. But when you become an adult, it should be a yes. It should maybe can exist, but no, becomes a foreign land. And now, of course, with consent, no is becoming the friend again. It's really, mind twisting. But I think for our generation, that for me, it was very difficult in a rural context to be oneself. It was very difficult to be oneself when all the representations around you was what was considered to be normal. And then I went off, I entered religious life, and I went off and I thought this was, because I knew I didn't fit anywhere. So I thought this is where I fit. But one thing I learned in religious life, I had this burning thing about social justice. And I joined an order that had this quest for social justice. So it kind of was fitted with who I was. But I realized I didn't fit there either. And they were very good and very kind to me when I left. And, you know, one of them one time turned around and said, you know, you really do need to go to college. And I remember looking at her and saying, ah, here, I can't afford it. And she put in front of me an application form for the CAO and handed me and also paid for the application. So I thought, right, okay, we filled it in, off went. I went back to London. At this stage, I worked in a hospice, a very sad but wonderful place to work, because you learn so much about life and humanity. And of course, lo and behold, Muggins here gets called for an interview for college. And I got into Maynooth. And what I discovered was I did sociology and philosophy. And there I found a home. A home for my thinking, a home for my notion of social justice, my home for understanding. And I will always be grateful to two people in particular, Micheál McGrail and Liam Ryan. And both of them happened to be priests, but both of them gave me a love and a sense of justice.
It's important, isn't it?
Radicalization. And they did radicalize us. Because how did they radicalize? They made us think.
Yeah. Can I come back to something, Mel, you and I were talking about before we came on air? A couple of days ago, you got some good news. Now, when we talk about heteronormative, I suppose a lot of the women of our generation who were LGBT, they perhaps expected that they would never be able to become mothers, they'd never be able to become wives, whatever you want to call it. I gather you had some good news this week, so if you could tell listeners what it was, Mel, and why it's important.
Well, for me, 22 years ago, I met this fabulous woman, fell in love with her, and lo and behold, she fell in love with me, and we decided to make a life together. We spent about 10 years of that relationship thinking about children. Oh my God, we went back and forth, back and forth. We had every permutation of why it would work, why it wouldn't work within a society in which we lived. And then we thought, bite the bullet, and off we went. And we had our first wonderful child, who's now 13. And then we have two other beauties, 10 and 7. But in a way, I was always the outsider, because that wife gave birth to the children, and she was their mother, but legally their mother. I remember our middle child had an accident one day, and he fell and he slit his cheek, and we had to take him to hospital. But I didn't exist in that.
Yeah.
Even though I was carrying him, she was asked everything, and she kept looking at me and said, what happened? So I was there, but they wouldn't listen. So that kind of, even though you are their parent, their mother in everything, from the moment they're born, from the moment they're conceived to the moment they're born, what had happened was you were estranged from them in law, and the institutions of society estranged you from them. And with 2015, with marriage equality came the promise of equality of family through the Relationship, Family and Relationship Act. Except I've always said that act was written by a heterosexual, because I'd never thought of the different type of families. So we've spent the last 5 odd years having bits added to it in addendum legislation to allow me become their parent legally. And this week, what fell in the letterbox were the new birth certs for all the children, which have my name on it, which means I am now legally their parent. And when I became their civil guardian, and I got civil guardianship, I remember our eldest sat there, he read the thing and he went, not good enough. Because the problem with civil guardianship, it gives it to you until you're 18. Once the child is 18 in one day, that means 18 in 1 second, they are now back to a stranger to you in law. Now they're no longer strangers to them in law. They have me now until the day I die. And I remember I said it to them and they both looked and said, are you going soon or something? You know, because that notion of, you know, we're now legally a family.
Yeah.
It is amazing.
Yeah, I think it's important because there are many of them. The old idea of the nuclear family where a heterosexual couple got together, they stayed together for life, and that was it.
Yeah.
That's the minority. Well, it may not be the minority, but it's certainly those of us who are in alternative relationships are very different these days. But it's taken the law quite a long time, or the politics, depending on how you want it, quite a long time to catch up and acknowledge the contribution that we've made, not only to a relationship, but also to the upbringing of children. So I just want to say, Mel, congratulations. They are very fortunate to have you as a parent.
Thank you very much. And I am extremely fortunate to the riches they bring to my life.
Yep. Let's move on now, because you've just had a conference up at DCU for the last couple of days. It was called INTERsex, A Vision for the Future. Before we talk about the conference itself, can you just explain to people what is intersex? Because a lot of people still have problems getting their head around the notion, and they think it's just a label you put on yourself like greenie or, you know, punk or you name it. So what is intersex?
Well, in a way, not all people may use the term intersex. And it's variation of sex characteristics, and it can come in various forms. The variation may be obvious at birth. It may be something that may later become available to you as a human being, that there is something in relation to you that might be different. The notion is really, if we actually take the birth of a child, and on the birth of a child, everybody rings and asks, what is it? A boy or what? The or what is the area, because the notion is that you're born either male or female.
It's a very binary notion, isn't it?
Absolutely. While the reality is children are born who may not fit that binary category. And it is how then, and which is now being called intersex or variations of sex characteristics, and how folk who are born into this world are treated within society. That's what our conference was about.
Tell us, what was discussed, and were there any, how did you see the future for people who would have classified themselves or been classified as intersex?
I think first of all, what's to be discussed?
Yeah.
One, we could say the world and its mother, because yes, we did. It was the situation within which people find themselves in. The world as it is constructed in binary, and the place for difference within society. One of the big things is the discussion of being allowed to make decisions about oneself when one is in a situation to make decisions, rather than decisions made about you when you're a baby. That is one of the big things, is being part of decision making, being able to come to who you are, decisions that were made that left people within situations that they didn't want to live in, who are living with bodies that have been constructed in ways that people feel don't belong to them, with bodies that have been permanently disabled. And we're talking about, we take for granted our bodies, but when your body is transformed without your consent, it leads to trauma, it leads to ways of thinking about oneself, which can lead you to not like what who you are being presented as, because you had no say in this. So what we looked at, and it started off really with Morgan Carpenter really setting the scene of being intersex in the world, of what life is like for being intersex in the world, and what kind of world we would like. And really, at the end of the day, what the conference is about is creating a vision of inclusivity and inclusivity of diversity, and allowing people as adults to come to who they are,
Sure.
make their own decisions rather than people making for. But the other thing is removing from families shame.
Mhm.
You know, sorry.
No. I was going to say, did you have any medical practitioners participating in the conference? Because traditionally, the medical profession is quite conservative and likes to see things in black and white. They don't like too many grey areas. But so how was that played out at the conference itself, Mel?
Yes, we did have medical professionals at the conference. And I think one of the things is what you have to remember is really, if you're a medical professional, you are trained to deal with what your specialism is.
Sure.
You think of it in relation to creating, from your perspective as a medic, a better, inverted commas, life for others. What the medical professionals who attended our conference were open to was listening to the lived experience of individuals who had received medical intervention, because normally that's not what the medical professional know. You know, because people come, you know, it's like anything else. People come and get an intervention from a medical professional, they go away. And that medical professional may never see that person again and may never know the consequences, good, bad, or indifferent, from that intervention. So what they heard was the consequences of that intervention. And that opens up a conversation, which I think is the best way of opening up a conversation. And it's like, you know, saying, what can we do for you? So that's where the transformative notion comes within that space.
Sure. Yeah. I may. I don't know if this is actually still holds, but I was at a conference probably about 10 years ago, and again, some of the professionals were discussing the issue of intersex, and they were looking at the criteria by when a child was born as to whether it was male or female. Now, in most instances, it's relatively straightforward, but by all accounts, what I was hearing was that they had a standard. If the penis was below a certain size, or if the clitoris was they defined it that way. Is that still applied?
Well, I am not a medic, so I'm going to do a pass on that one, because different areas have got different ways of thinking. Because if you go around the world, every area have different ways of deciding what is and what isn't. And I do not want to make any medical medical issues with it, because that's not my field.
Yeah. One of the, what I would say is probably the most prominent examples of somebody born into a gender and then suddenly coming up against, how can I call it, a perception, is in sport. And the case I'm thinking of is Caster Semenya, the fabulous South African athlete. Now, Caster Semenya had no control over the body she was born in, but I suspect if she wasn't as good, then it might have been a different attitude. But she's in the bizarre situation. Most other people, you take drugs and you're out of sport. In her case, if you don't take the drugs, you're out of sport. And is that a good example of how people are perceived and how people are treated? Because it's incredibly undignified.
And the problem for her is that her undignified treatment is very public.
Isn't it just?
And I just think I think most people on their normal day-to-day activity don't realize what people go through what kind of lives they're living, what they go through, what is open to people, what isn't open to people, and how it plays out. You want to play a sport, but I suppose it's one of the things that just bugs me. And I'll give you an example. We celebrated a Irish woman doing extraordinarily well in golf. Look at what she got in prize money.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
This is all you have to look at. You look at this demarcation between male sport, female sport, and we decided that male sport is the pinnacle of all.
Yeah.
And therefore, if you must, but to be that, you have to fit in a certain way. So I think this is a problem, because I think everything in society represents the binary. We've all of these issues. We talk about men's Gaelic, but we have ladies Gaelic. No. Men, we don't call it gentlemen. Why don't we call it women?
I know, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, what are we doing here? We're demarcating and whatever. And then when we go back and we look and we say, you must have a certain body to do this. If you don't have a certain body, then, or if you have a different body, are you, inverted commas, at an advantage? So we're going back, and it's something we spoke about before we came on air. It was this notion of, what is a woman? What is a man? What is a real woman? What is a real man? Why are we stuck in these real things of, wanting to say, you were real, you're false, you're this, you're that? That is where we're moving into dangerous territory, because what that does is it narrows the scope for the multiplicity of differences. I'm a woman, but I am not saying the same as my partner who's a woman, because we're two different women.
Of course. Yeah. Well, look, you've given if you look at the example, probably the finest athlete that we have produced over the last 20 years is Katie Taylor. But look at the money that Conor McGregor has made by comparison. But
exactly.
Now, I just want to go back to the conference, because we're about to run out of time. But will any of the talks be available? Have they been recorded, or even the papers published, so that people who weren't able to participate or attend the conference, that they'll still be able to get access to the information?
At present, we didn't get consent for the papers that were recorded to be made public. So we're going back to ask. We had one of the critical issues of the conference was to create a safe space.
Absolutely.
So that people could be open, comfortable, and honest. We didn't allow for Twitter to be used during the conference, because one of the problems that has happened is that the downside of Twitter and social media have been extraordinarily negative in this space. And what we didn't want were participants to be hounded and haggled over the papers that they were presenting. So we created that space to allow an emergence.
Yeah. Well, this is why I wanted to talk to you today, so that we could do that without, in a sense, in a filtered way, but still get the information out there without, shall we say, exposing or embarrassing anybody. Mel, you do.
Before you press the off button, can I please say to folk who may be parents of people who are intersex, maybe partners of people who are intersex, who may themselves be intersex. We have a project which is called the INTERsex Mapping Project in DCU. We are still interviewing people, whether it's family members, people themselves who are intersex, and you may contact us in DCU and we will listen to your stories, and we want to create, the reason for calling it a mapping project is we don't know what the numbers of people in Ireland who are intersex. There's no register, but we want to give a voice. Sure. And we cannot have change at policy or at government level or legislation without evidence. So we're trying to create the evidence to create space for change. And we also want to be able to say to the new fledgling INTERsex NGO that's being developed is saying, here is the evidence that you can go and get and create what you want to live your lives in society.
How can people contact you, Mel? How, even just for information?
For information, if they email me at mel.duffy@dcu.ie, we will forward you on any information you need.
Mel, it's always terrific to talk to you. It's always informative to talk to you. And again, I just want to congratulate you on your recognition, is the way I will put it, because it just goes to show what we started all those years ago. The harvest is coming in, and I feel so proud of that. And you've been central to it all. So Dr. Mel Duffy, thank you for your time today.
And thank you very much for asking me.
Yeah.
My world that I want to have a little pride in. My world, and it's not a place I have to hide in. Life's not worth a damn till you can say